Thank you, Alan. I'm Richard Saltman. I'm in the School of Public Health. I usually look at European health systems, but I occasionally pay attention to what happens in the United States in terms of the health sector. And I'm going to try, keep the time, and also talk about what is a very contentious issue, which is the whole issue of health reform. I would argue that health reform may be, if not the first issue, I mean, in terms of what Tom had said, in terms of the economy, that the Health Reform Act that was passed last March has generated a lot of controversy, and in many ways has become something of a millstone around the Democratic Party's neck. It wasn't supposed to be this way. But that's what's happened. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal just today talking about the number of vulnerable Democrats, actually, who are particularly vulnerable because they voted in favor of the Health Reform Act. What was supposed to happen was, after the act was passed last March and signed, things were supposed to quiet down. The opponents were supposed to kind of melt away. We were supposed to move into implementation. My colleague Ken Thorpe, who helped write some of the bill, said that, well, the rules in the House and in the Senate will require it to be implemented in a kind of stage-wise way, and it's very hard to see how you can shift that process. In fact, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that opposition has not only maintained itself, it's grown. It's become more consistent. It's still a majority of the electorate, and it seems unlikely that it is in fact going to melt. What appears to be happening is a strengthening and a redoubling of efforts. That suggests that even with the picture that Alan presented of sort of semi-quasi sort of stalemate in the Congress, between the parties, that the health bill is going to be front and center, and that health reform is likely to be revisited in some fundamental way. That doesn't necessarily mean repeal, and I don't think you're going to see repeal, but there's going to be a lot of commotion around the whole process. Why did this happen? I'll try and summarize this very quickly. 4 key terms. Number one, the content of the bill. There's all sorts of things in there that represent a Democratic Party wish list. They do not represent the sorts of things, if you were thinking in consensus terms of what works in the health sector as it is currently structured in the United States. There's many parts of that bill that's a dream list. There are also many parts of the bill that are centralizing, that are highly bureaucratic. They build in all sorts of additional roles for beloved agencies like the Internal Revenue Service. There are a lot of things there in content that are problematic. Most importantly, it creates uncertainty for employers. Uncertainty is a serious issue in terms of economic growth and economic development. So there's a dilemma with the content. There certainly was a dilemma with the process. Apparently nobody told the Congress or the Democratic leadership in the Congress that there was this thing called cable news networks, and that cable news networks would actually report apparently what they were doing so that it would be not a back room with or without smoke, but that it was going to be front and center every time they cut a deal. And there were an awful lot of deals that were cut. So it was a very unsavory process, even for legislation. And that was critical. Third dilemma is context. Very briefly, and most of you are very well aware of this, you have a national debt picture which is not sustainable, about which something is going to have to be done one way or another. You have, out of the debt crisis, you have now got a sovereign debt crisis in Europe. The United States is a perfect candidate to be visited someday soon by that sovereign debt crisis. And if, in fact, Greece does default, which is something that as recently as this week, some very respected commentators have suggested, there are serious issues here. That's one reason the United Kingdom has gone in and not cut its health sector, but cut pretty much everything else, out of concern that they not be visited by the ghost of the sovereign debt crisis. Both these things add up to a very simple truth, which is there's no more money. There's no more money for entitlements. There's no more money for big bills. Of the scope and scale of this health reform. Whether you want to see it, whether it's necessary, is separate from whether you have the capacity to pay for it. There's a third dimension on that, by the way. There's not just debt and the sovereign debt crisis, the national debt in the U.S., the sovereign debt crisis globally, but there's the whole issue of competitiveness internationally and the rise of the Asian economies, which has changed the configuration. Those elements are all important. Lastly, there are specifics to the health sector. As it turns out, the European health systems have, for the last 5 years, put tremendous effort into finding ways to reduce the role of government in their health sectors. They have been experimenting with a wide range of mechanisms. They're talking now about increased individual responsibility. They are not dismantling their solidaristic approach to funding, but they are trying to find ways to accommodate what they recognize as a fundamentally changing environment. The United States is, in this bill, moving in precisely the opposite direction in terms of increasing the role of government at every level, and that raises all sorts of complications. So that's the context issue. Lastly, there's the culture issue, just the fact that Americans don't trust their government. That's a historical issue. There's also a deep strain. Alan was talking about the Tea Party, but the Tea Party represents a strain of Jeffersonian insistence on limited government, on lack of trust of government, on demand for low taxes, that's fairly consistent and has shown its head historically, well, since Jefferson. And that's one reason the United States has what colleague Victor Rodwin referred to as a reluctant welfare state. It's because of the tension with that Jeffersonian concept. That really creates some very strong limits, some strong parameters around what is acceptable to a substantial segment of the American population. Not everyone. As Alan said, there's a fairly even split, but when you look at where the independents are going in this election, you add the independents to the Jeffersonian limited government approach folks, and that starts to look like, in a number of cases, a majority. So where does that leave us? Do we need health reform that will alter the structure of the current system? Do we need health reform that can meet the social expectations in terms of providing adequate coverage to those who do not have coverage? Do we need health reform that will allow the United States to reduce or redirect the flow of funds? It's now 16, 17% of the economy. The answer to all that is yes. The dilemma is that this particular process, this particular bill, doesn't respond to those questions and sets the stage for health being an important issue in a lot more elections, I guess.